today. My name is Scott Harmon. I work for a company called ZCorp. We make a machine called a three-dimensional printer. Just so I can get a sense of you guys, I'm curious, how many of you, is everybody engineers here? Mechanical designers? Yeah, okay. And how many of you are using prototyping technology today? Any prototyping technology? SLA, SLS, FDM? Everybody's got some experience with that for the most part. Great. The title of my presentation, as you can see, is Beyond Prototyping. So I think based on some information that we've collected, some experience that we've had with our customers, our general belief is that prototypes are being pretty widely used across a lot of industries today, but that a lot of companies aren't using prototyping the way they could be using prototyping. And if they expanded the way that they thought about prototyping, they could actually get a lot of business benefit out of it. So I think most of the people in this audience already believe that prototypes contribute to better design. This is pretty well established in the literature. There's a lot of anecdotal data, there's a lot of industry data that suggests that companies that use prototypes actively in their design process get better products at lower cost. Our belief is that prototypes today, the way they're being used, are not optimal. That you could use prototypes in a completely different way and get a lot more business benefit than what you get from the way you use prototypes today. And finally, that there are a lot of organizations out there that are figuring out these new methods of using prototypes and are getting a lot of benefit out of that. And we'll talk about how that works. So basically, back to basics. What is a prototype? A prototype is just the pattern on which something is formed. So this is basically the idea that before we're going to create the final product, we're going to create a prototype of that product. And we're going to make sure that that prototype reflects what ultimately it is that we're trying to deliver, usually to some customer. Prototypes can be made hundreds of different ways. There are rapid prototyping technologies, there are 3D printing technologies, there are people who make prototypes by hand, prototypes are made with CNC machines, they're made all different kinds of ways. Fundamentally, a prototype is used to learn something about what you're trying to design. That can be a functional learning, that can be learning how the design interacts with people, it can be part of the sales process. There are a lot of things that a prototype can be used for. As you can see, David Kelly, he's one of the founders of IDEO. IDEO is probably the most widely known industrial design firm in the world. We're out in Palo Alto. They have offices all over the world. When I say that the use of prototypes is pretty well established as being important to good design, David Kelly is a person who would certainly agree with that. The IDEO design process, when you go and look at their website, is all about the use of prototypes to create better designs. And you can see here, he says the number and quality of prototypes leads directly to the quality of the end design. So prototypes are clearly important to IDEO. I don't know if you guys have seen this research. This comes out of Aberdeen. Aberdeen is an organization that does a lot of research on a lot of different topics. What they found is that the best in class in design were more than twice as likely to use prototyping technologies in addition to their CAD tools as companies that were not best in class in design. And interestingly, so what is best in class? What does that mean? What that means is that they're able to deliver products to their customers on time and on budget twice as frequently as people who aren't using those technologies. So again, across hundreds of companies, it's now pretty well defined, pretty well decided, known that prototyping leads to better design outcomes. Interestingly, this particular research was actually underwritten by the software companies, AutoCAD, Autodesk, PTC. Their message generally is you don't need to do physical prototypes. You can do it all digitally. The research didn't turn out that way. What it found was that the best-in-class companies are using both physical prototypes and virtual prototypes to get great design out of their products. Finally, a book by Stephen Wheelwright and Kim Clark, the former dean of the Harvard Business School. Senior managers and functional heads who don't understand prototyping are handicapping their organization's ability to design. It doesn't get any more fundamental than this. At the end of the day, making physical prototypes is critical to great design. It sounds like most of you guys have already discovered that. The question is, how should prototypes be used, how have they been used, and how should they be used in the future? So, most people know that prototyping grew out of primarily a couple of older technologies, SLA, FDM, SLS. These technologies were originally brought into existence primarily as a verification tool towards the end of a product development process. So before you were going to spend all the money to have tooling cut, you would do a prototype to make sure that before you made that big expensive decision that you had exactly what you wanted. It was a tool for avoiding mistakes and saving money on tooling. We call that verification. And because of a number of different reasons, that's where a lot of prototyping still gets done today. Is people use a prototype near the end of their design process simply to verify that the design that they're going to get out of their tool is the one that they actually want. Everybody's probably familiar with this. This is why that happens. The reason that happens is because the cost of making mistakes on tools is enormously expensive, both in terms of time and money. The whole point of prototyping is to push mistakes back earlier in the design process where they're less expensive to fix. If you mess up an SLA model or an SLS model, okay, you're going to pay $1,000, $2,000. You're not going to pay 10 or 20 or $50,000 for blowing a tool. Okay? And so by pushing those mistakes earlier in the process, you save a lot of money and you save a lot of time, which is what everybody wants to do. Interestingly, when you talk to designers and engineers about what they're really trying to accomplish, they don't really talk about reducing the cost of design. What they talk about is designing products that meet customer needs better, right? It doesn't really matter if your tool matches your prototype if your prototype doesn't match what the customer is asking for, right? And fundamentally, the purpose of design is to design products that people are going to want to use and they're going to use effectively and that people are willing to pay for. Those decisions don't necessarily get made in the verification stage of the design process. They get made a lot earlier. So this is what designers and engineers are trying to do. They're trying to design products that their customers actually want. And when you ask them how they use prototypes, they tend to use prototypes to test fit and functional performance and to validate tools. When you're talking about generating new design ideas, that falls down near the bottom of the list. But that's where the genius of design is, right? The genius of design is the creative process at the beginning. That's where ideas are created. That's where customer needs are fundamentally met, not at the verification stage at the end. So the question is, why are designers and engineers, who are a pretty smart bunch, using prototypes in a way that's not consistent with their objectives for the entire design process? Why do they save the prototype production and creation to the end of the design process when the answer is already pretty much known, when you're using it largely as a verification tool? Michael Schrader wrote a book about serious play. This is a book all about innovation. And he's a big proponent of prototyping. And one of the things he says is the prototype itself is a medium for co-development with the client. Okay? This is a way that you can interact with clients and customers with the actual design. Engineers know what they're looking at when they look at SolidWorks or PTC, right? The people who don't know are the end customers. End customers, it really, really helps to have that physical design in your hand to figure out whether or not that meets their needs or not. So it's a critical step. What we're talking about when we say beyond prototyping is pushing prototyping to the beginning of the design process where that creative process occurs, where designers and engineers and product managers can interact with customers to figure out what the customer really wants, to use it as a creative tool, as an innovation tool, not as a verification tool. It's not so much about cost avoidance as it is about finding designs that make your customers happy, that motivate your customers to buy. And that's what 3D printing should be about, is that early innovation stage of the design process. So again, why don't people use it that way? Well, there are a few reasons. The first thing is that if you're spending money on an SLA part, if you're spending $1,000 or $2,000 for a tool, you can't have 5 or 6 of those things or 10 of those things created early in the design process. It costs an enormous amount of money to have that done. Second, the CADware software itself. It costs a lot of money for the 3D CAD software. To have the designer actually create a whole bunch of different iterations can be relatively expensive. And so people tend to go to one design very, very early on and then just verify that design. Finally, there's the issue of prototype ownership. So I worked at a consumer packaged goods company. I was in marketing. We actually had a prototyping machine in the building. We could actually make prototypes. Nobody in marketing knew that it existed. The only people who knew that it existed were the people who worked in engineering. And the people in engineering weren't using it for the kind of creative process that allows you to design new and innovative products. And so, for all of these reasons, in a lot of companies, the prototyping system gets used, again, as a verification tool, not as a creative tool, not as a tool that customers can interact with designs and create new and better designs, which is what everybody wants at the end of the day. I'm going to give you a few examples of customers who are using what we would say beyond prototyping, using 3D printing machines to create prototypes in a different way than what is traditionally used. So Cisco systems, everybody's familiar with Cisco, they have a European design center. So design is clearly very, very important to them. They prototype, as you can see, just a ridiculous amount. When you go into their offices, they have 3D printed models everywhere. They're all over the place. Every single design review that they do, where they got the engineers, the designers, and everybody else sitting in a room talking about design, they are doing it with physical prototypes in hand. And what that allows them to do is that allows them to get everybody in the room and talk about prototypes, and interact with prototypes, and to speak very, very specifically about what they want to do with the design, about what the design is intended to accomplish, what it is accomplishing, et cetera, et cetera. They show it up to customers far before they get into talking about tooling and SLA models and things like that. So they're showing these designs, these 3D printed models, to people way, way earlier in the design process than what most companies do. And as a result, they can iterate the designs quickly, create new designs that better meet customer needs. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's all about creating products that meet customers' needs better than what you can otherwise do. And to do that, putting prototypes in the hands of customers is one of the key ways to make that happen. Now, the key to this is, again, if that table was filled with SLA parts, how much would that cost if you bought that from a service bureau? It's probably $50,000, $100,000 worth of parts sitting on the table. So you can't use older technologies to do this. You have to adopt newer technologies. And so in this particular case, they use a ZCorp 3D printer. The parts there, instead of being $25 a cubic inch, are closer to $3 to $5 a cubic inch. And when you can make parts that inexpensively and that quickly, you can share, design, iterate, create in a way that you can't do with more expensive technologies. Black & Decker, another classic example. The world leader in hand tools, they do $5.5 billion a year in hand tools, power tools and things like that across a number of brands. Black & Decker, Porter Cable, DeWalt, et cetera, et cetera. Same kind of thing. Their designers knock off a bunch of concept models early in the process, share those concept models with customers, and iterate those designs quickly. Again, that can't be done with expensive systems. And it's hard to do with service bureaus because it's all outsourced. So you bring the machine in-house, you can operate that machine at a fraction of the cost, and now you can create designs really, really, really quickly, put those designs in the hands of everybody from marketing to sales to product management to customers to get better quality design outcomes. Now, when I get to this point in the presentation, basically everybody says, okay, well, I don't work for Cisco and I don't work for DeWalt, so I don't do consumer goods. How is this relevant to me? So one of my favorite customers of ours is a company called Spirax Sarco. They make steam heating and process plants. So that's a long way away from a consumer product, right? These guys make industrial pumps, heat exchangers, and things like that. But fundamentally, they do the exact same thing. They make these parts, they make them quickly, and they share them with potential customers. A lot of the work that they do is actually custom, and so they can share designs with customers, interact, talk about the designs in a way that they couldn't do before. Interestingly, they take it far beyond even the design process. They actually use the exact same models in sales presentations, at seminars, at trade shows. They use it in training and all kinds of other things. And so they push the use of 3D prints out beyond the design process and into the process of sales and marketing and everything else like that. You can't do that with the more expensive systems. It just costs too much. But with a 3D printing system, the cost is so much lower, the models can be created so much faster that you can use them in ways that you just couldn't do before. That combined with the fact that the CAD software is actually getting easier and easier to use all the time means that you can generate really, really outstanding 3D prints early and inexpensively in the design process and get all the benefits of moving creativity into that early phase and really, really creating products that people care about. In summary, we all know that using prototypes is really, really important for good design outcomes. If you're not using prototypes today, you're in trouble, because there are a lot of people out there who are. Now, prototypes don't work for all industries, and again, everybody has to make prototypes in the way that's appropriate. It's hard to make a prototype of a locomotive. But if you're not using prototypes somehow, you're leaving yourself at risk to companies who are designing faster and getting better design outcomes as a result of the fact that they're using prototyping. Historically, prototypes have been used in a very, very specific way. That has been driven by the fact that CAD is relatively expensive and difficult to operate. SLA machines are very, very expensive to use, and therefore the models are expensive to use, and that engineers have owned it and not necessarily been sharing it with everybody else. And then finally, a lot of intelligent companies out there are really pushing the boundaries in terms of how prototypes are used in their design process, who uses the prototypes and what they use it for to get better overall design outcomes. And that's where creativity and innovation really happens with companies, is at that early stage in the design process. And with tools like 3D printers, you can actually do that at a cost that makes sense for most design processes. That's what I came to present. Anybody have any questions? No? Straightforward? Okay, we're at the show. Feel free to drop by the booth. We can show you plenty of examples of a lot of different companies, a lot of different prototype parts that you might be interested in having a look at. Thanks very much.